Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Beautiful text from Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. Paul is 3 chapters in, or rather in the 3rd chapter of the letter to the Colossians. He's already established prayer, the deity and humanity of Christ, his reconciling work, the circumcision of the flesh being put off in the death of Christ, and fullness that we have in him, so that we don't need to seek knowledge of God through other things like abstinence from certain items. All very, very Colossian type problems. As he goes into the second half of the letter, chapters 3 and 4, he begins to go into new life in Christ, the put off, be renewed, put on, that we see paralleled in the letter to the Ephesians. So we'll jump into that right away. Since then, you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. So let's unpack that first verse. Since then, this word since, right, is doing two things. One, it is setting up this right here. Since you've been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above. This looks forward to what comes next. But it also builds on what came from behind. This, you have been raised with Christ, since you have been raised with Christ, this is something that Paul has already established, particularly in chapter 2, and even a little bit in chapter 1. So he's looking back to the argument he's already established that you have been raised with Christ. Now, chapter 2, set your heart on things above. And then here, the word above is unpacked with where Christ is. And then where Christ is unpacked with seated at the right hand of God. And so now we know particularly what's in view here. He's asking us to look to heaven. That's where the above is. So if you're wondering, well, where is above? What does above mean? He wants us to have our hearts set on heavenly things. Now, a quick note about the word set. Set your hearts literally could be translated seek the things above. It is a verb that has by definition, this activity to it. And the reason that that's important is because I don't want us to think of set as an inactive verb. We tend to think of set like set something down and leave it there. But that is not at all what Paul intends. It's a very active setting of the heart on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. And this statement, by the way, is a command. Set your heart on things above. And it will parallel this other command right here. Set your mind on things above. And then in opposition to this one right here, not on earthly things. Right? This is set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. So he's going to ground it. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. So these two realities coming together. For you died, and now you live, but your life is hidden with Christ, right? Which comes back up to this, raised with Christ. You have been raised with Christ. Your life is now hidden with Christ in God. Implicit in this resurrection with Christ is also our death. We have died. And then also Christ, who is your life, right? So all over this initial passage, this unity with Jesus's death and resurrection is central. So there's two aspects to this first couple verses. One is union with Christ in his death and resurrection, and the other is mind and heart in heaven. So let's continue unpacking this. Verse 2, the second command. Set your minds on things in heaven. Now, the word set here as well has a unique meaning in the Greek, and it literally means to concentrate or to give a lot of mental energy, to set the mind to think deeply about something. So the two words that we're left with are seeking, and if you were to, another word for concentrate here would be meditate. Set your heart and your mind on heaven by seeking and meditating on heaven, on the Lord, on particularly where Christ is, right? So set your minds on things above, and this is given in opposition to earthly things, right? For you died, literally, right, to these earthly things. We've died to those earthly things, and now our life is hidden with Christ in God. With Christ in God. And so if I were to, we could ask ourselves this question: where do I live? Which should be a very obvious answer, right? I live here on the earth. But if my life is now hidden with Christ in God, and Christ is seated at the right hand of God, right? What is he doing? He's drawing our attention to where Christ is. I don't just live here on the earth. I also very much in a completely real way, I live in heaven because my life is unified with Christ. We are so aware of our existence here on the earth. We are so unaware of our existence at the present in heaven. What do we always say? When I get to heaven, I'm looking forward to heaven. Well, Paul is saying you are there now because your life is hidden with Christ in God. What are you waiting for? Well, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. When this happens, then this will happen. When Christ, who is already this very moment your life, appears, then one day you'll appear with him in glory. You'll be glorified just like Jesus is. And that'll be pretty sweet. And what will happen in that day is these two finally merge, and they're just in one spot from there on and out. But in a very real way, right now, we are simultaneously on the earth and in heaven because we are in Christ, even though our bodies and our souls are still residing on the earth as well. So when he's telling us to concentrate on heavenly things and seek heavenly things, there is also simply this kind of growing awareness of my existence in Christ and therefore in heaven. And when you start to think that way, it changes everything. It changes the way you view the world. It changes your concept of what's important. It changes your idea of what's appropriate or inappropriate. And that's where the next verses come in. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Let's begin with the first command: put to death, therefore. And what is the therefore grounded in? Everything that's come above, right? You live in Christ, in heaven, right now. Have your mind up there. When you do, you begin to realize, oh my gosh, I'm alive in Jesus, in heaven, right this very moment. When you return to the earthly, everything that you've died to, and I'll just go purple here, don't set your mind on earthly things. Don't live in what belongs to your earthly nature. This is completely inappropriate for someone who is seated on the throne. This is completely inappropriate for someone who is seated at the right hand of God. So put to death whatever belongs to your earthly nature. Don't set our minds on earthly things. What is of my earthly nature, Paul? Here we go. 5 things. 1, sexual immorality. That's any kind of sex outside of marriage. 2, impurity. 3, lust. 4, evil desires. 5, greed, which is idolatry. And just think about that for a moment. Think about being in the throne room of God and worshiping an idol. Think about being in the throne room of God and cheating on your spouse or viewing pornography. Think about being in the throne room of God and doing something impure. Think about being in the throne room of God and acting out of lust or pursuing what is evil. Think about trying to hurt someone in God's throne room. Think about pursuing wealth. Think about worshiping an idol. And how gut-wrenching, how insane, how utterly inappropriate. It's the epitome of insolence to do this. And if we're being honest, we don't want to. When we think about, I live right now, my existence is with Christ in heaven, I don't want to do this stuff, right? So that's why we're supposed to, back to this, set your hearts on things above and set your minds on things above. That is the way in which we put to death all of these things: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, and idolatry. If you simply try to just stop doing those things, what happens? Doesn't work, right? How do we kill it? By living above. Now, Paul adds, because of these earthly things that we're doing, the wrath of God is coming. He reminds us, God hates this, right? So if God hates this, if God's wrath is coming, and I live in his presence, how will I do these things? I don't want to do those things. Verse 7, you used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, right? Thank God we don't anymore. God has redeemed us. He's saved us. We're out of that. We're being transformed. But here we go. But now, and sorry, real quick. Let me just put real quick right here. Old man is what we'll put. Old man. And here I'm just going to put old man lust. Passions, if you will. And you can think of all of the vices, all of the passions, all of the lusts of the flesh in that. But now you must also, let's go with black. But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge, in the image of its creator. All right, here we go. So we had old man, lusts, and passions. But now you must also, and sorry, let me get this read. So put to death all of these things. But now you must also rid yourselves of all these things. Boom, and lying. So we'll just circle out all the things that we have to put to death. All right. So he gives us a second half of these old man behaviors. And I love that he gives us these two categories. If this is old man 1, this is old man 2. And here it's different forms of anger. And different kind of destructive behaviors we engage in as Christians in the church, unfortunately. Here we go. Anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language, and lying. Okay, so anger, right? Anger is we all know what anger is. That feeling of aggression towards somebody else, that feeling of they've done something wrong. There's been some injustice. They're not doing what I want. People aren't doing what I want them to do, and now I'm mad. Situations aren't the way that I want them to be. So anger is a response, right, to life being outside the way we want life to be or we think it should be. Anger is our response. And that's as small as that person didn't get the door for me. I'm a little annoyed by them, to there is some terrible abuse of an innocent person. All of that's anger. Now, when anger becomes uncontrolled, it turns into rage, right? And rage doesn't have to be abusive. It's just uncontrolled. We know people who are slaves to their anger. They respond in anger to everything. Well, it may not be loud or aggressive or angry or extremely destructive rage, but that's rage nonetheless. When anger is uncontrolled, that's rage. Malice is when you're beginning to harbor those ill feelings towards another person. Slander is when you're cutting them down with your words. Now, we typically call this gossip, right? Or worse, we have these prayer requests or these concerns about other people. That's typically what that looks like. Filthy language would include cursing and sorts of jokes that are totally inappropriate. And then, of course, lying, right? Lying. And we do a lot of that in church, don't we? We lie about how we're really doing. We lie about how our spiritual life really is. We do a lot of lying. And here's the thing, guys. Old man 2, unfortunately, acceptable at church, and old man 1, not acceptable. And that's why Paul splits them up, I think. That's what he says in the first one. You can't do this anymore. I know y'all know that. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived. But hey, what about group number 2? We don't think of that one as bad as group number 1, but it's just as bad. It's just as wrong. It equally has no place among the Lord's people. Why? Because if we're living up here in heaven, can you imagine doing any of these things in God's presence? Crazy, right? Absolutely crazy. Okay. He says, don't do all this, and then he grounds it right here. Since you have taken off your old self with its practices. And just a reminder, this old self thing that keeps coming up, right? Your earthly nature, your old self, these old ways that you used to walk in, all of that is dead and gone because of the cross. So at any point in time, if I'm living in any of these things, I just need to remember, that version of Joe is dead. He died at the cross. He died with Christ in Jesus, at the cross. All right, so here we go. You take off the old self with its practices, and we don't stay that way. We don't just take off and leave it at that. We must also put on the new self. I don't just die with Christ, I resurrect. I come to new life in Jesus. And the new man is still growing. The new self is still being renewed in the knowledge, in the image of its creator. So being renewed, this is, remember, a passive verb, meaning the renewing is being done to me. We remind ourselves of John 15. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing, all right? I cannot be renewed unless I am connected to Christ. How do I stay connected to Christ? I seek him. I meditate on him. I do these things in faith, seated at the right hand of God. I understand that I live there. And so now I'm being renewed in knowledge, in the image of my Creator. Just by beholding the glory of Christ, I am transformed. I am renewed. I am grown in him. And so in this next one, right, we're talking about put on new man. And now lastly, this last bit is really cool. And it's talking about how the new man has a barrier destroying identity. Identity. All right, here we go. Here, the first thing I'm going to do is put this question mark. Here, what does this mean, Paul? Here, there is no Gentile or Jew. And now we're going to get all these couplings. Gentile, Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free. I want to make the point that what Paul is doing with these couplings is not saying that all our cultural or earthly or nationality or language traits disappear in Jesus. That's not what these couplings represent. Gentile or Jew gets to the way that the Jews divided humanity. Circumcised and uncircumcised, again, is the way that the Jews divided humanity. Barbarian and Scythian is how the Romans divided the world. They said there's the Roman Empire and then there's the barbarians. And of the barbarians, the Scythians, they lived in the steppe country in Asia, rode on horseback, a lot of raiding, and very rough people. They're just kind of like one of the most well-known barbarian groups. But to the Romans, the whole world was Rome or barbarian. And then classic, right? And has never gone away. Slave or free. But in the Roman Empire, about half the people were slaves, about half the people were free. So that slavery is a huge deal. But Christ is all and is in all. So here, and again, we haven't answered where here is yet. Here, there is no Gentile, Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free. So here, there is no barrier. Barrier between people based on custom, flesh, or freedom, race. None of this, or I should say ethnicity, none of this becomes a barrier. None of this, the barrier between people, all of these things is dissolved. Here. Again, where is here? Well, and to answer that, we need to look at this last section. But Christ is all and is in all. So here is in Christ. Here is in Christ. And if we are in Christ, then Christ is all and is in all. Which means that our identity, right? Our identity in Jesus is a barrier-destroying one. This is coming in preparation to our political series. And so if you are watching this at some point in the future, sorry, this last bit's not going to make sense, but I'm applying this to our political series. It's 2024. America's deeply divided over Republican and Democrat. And the temptation in the church is to allow Democrat or Republican to become the dividing line that separates Christians. And this cannot be. Because again, if Christ is in all, and Christ is all, then this earthly division gets destroyed. The new man has a barrier-destroying identity. If I am living in heaven, in Christ, I will remember who else is living there too? Every other believer. And we are one in Christ. That doesn't mean we lose our earthly identities entirely, but it does mean that this greater identity in Jesus, that he is in all and that he is all, and that we are all in him, our lives are hidden in him, that destroys the barrier between man. So that's another important part about putting on the new man, is the unity of the church because of our union with Christ.